Let's answer the question, why should you attend the English Learner Digital Fraction Camp? Well, here's some reasons. So what are the goals and what will we be doing, or what's the reasoning behind this camp? First of all is to develop academic discourse. And when I talk about academic discourse, what I mean is any ways that students can use semiotic tools to communicate their ideas. And semiotic tools are nothing more than meaning-making tools or meaning-making devices. Of course, we use words, spoken words and written words, but we also use symbols like numbers and multiplication signs. We use symbols in specific ways like numerators of fractions and denominators of fractions. We also learn how to organize using pictorial representations and so forth. Okay, so academic discourse is more than just being able to speak English. For sure we want them to speak English, but we want to go beyond that. We want them to use English as a learning tool, a tool for learning their mathematics. We want them to be able to make meaning with fractions. I think that many people, when they learn fractions for the first time in elementary school and even beyond, have a very vague idea of what those fractions mean. And if you ask students, what does it mean 3/4 or what does it mean 3/8, they'd have a very hard time explaining that meaning or really coming up with a consistent or accurate definition of what they mean when they say a fraction. You're going to learn how to build student engagement both online and in the classroom. More importantly, I think, is how to integrate the engagement activities that we develop online with those that we develop in the classroom. There's no reason why they should be separate in my mind. And if we think of distance learning as a thing separate from our classroom learning, then that's a problem. I think that our distance learning should be integrated with our classroom learning. I really know that we don't have a clear idea of what our classroom instruction is going to look like going forward yet. But what I do know is this: whatever component is in person in the classroom needs to integrate seamlessly with whatever component is at a distance. And those things should come together. Those components should come together to make meaning for our students, to help our students make meaning. You're going to get some really cool free digital materials and some physical materials. You're going to get a classroom set of the physical manipulatives. That's cool. And you're going to get a free digital suite of tools, a digital suite of tools that you can use and effectively to help your instruction. Now, okay, you're going to also get planning time where you collaborate with your colleagues, either grade level colleagues or vertical colleagues, however you decide to engage. But I think that it's going to be really critical that we have planned out or allocated somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30% of your time for planning. So you're not going to walk away with a bunch of ideas that you don't have time to put into plans. I think you'll have time to get that planning done, or a large portion of it. So let's talk about how we're going to develop academic discourse. Well, of course, we're going to try to help students improve their English acquisition. There's going to be multiple opportunities for students to listen and think and speak and write and read. And we're going to use technologies that will help students to engage in those 4 components of literacy strongly in English. And the more ways that you can engage in those 4 components and over time, then the stronger your English becomes. That's true, by the way, for English-only students or for second language students, but I think we all know that. And it's especially true for all students in mathematics. What I mean by that is very few students come from households where math talk is the first language. So math talk is going to be a second language for almost all of our students. We want them to improve conceptual understanding. What is mathematical literacy? Well, it has to be meaningful in the student's mind, they have to have a conceptual understanding of what's going on. I think that most students, especially when it comes to fractions, don't really understand the concepts. They try to learn some math tricks, like flip and multiply or whatever they've been taught, to just desperately try to pass the quiz. And we want to get away from that, because trying to memorize things that way will lead to weak understanding, and they'll probably end up performing less well on the exams that we give them or that the state gives them. So we want to build conceptual understanding. That's what this entire process will be about. But we want to create strong learning environments, because in strong learning environments, teachers know this. I'm not giving you something you've never heard about before. But in strong learning environments built around fractions, then students will have the opportunity to think about fractions, communicate about fractions, and learn about fractions in so many varied ways that our goal is, at the end, they've learned the fractions without really feeling like, oh my God, I just got put through this terrible experience. They'll think that they've gone through an experience that they can transfer to any learning in the world. So what does using multiple representations mean? Well, we're going to use concrete manipulatives. And for those of you who have never, I think you all know what they are, but if you've never actually defined them rigorously, let me give us a working definition. I think concrete manipulatives means anytime a student is holding and manipulating an object. It could be blocks, it could be pencils, it could be marbles, it could be anything, but they have to hold it in their hands and they have to manipulate it in some way to make meaning. Pictorial representations are super important. It's a huge and important bridge for students to use pictures. I think almost all teachers do that in some way or another. The big mistake I think that many teachers make is they think that they can bypass the concrete manipulatives and start using pictorial representations as if they replace them. They don't. They can't. Our students are in that developmental stage where they have concrete developmental ideas, in their head, or where they're developing ideas through concrete manipulation, and they have to use those. We're going to use digital representations. Again, I think many teachers have seen and probably even used digital representations, but trying to use them without giving that strong background of concrete and pictorial representations is a mistake. Digital representations don't replace the first two. They make an important addition, they just don't replace. Symbolic representation, this is what most people call mathematics, like writing down numbers and symbols and letters, whatever you're using to represent those mathematical ideas, diagrams, whatever. That's what, if you wrote it down on a piece of paper, then it's what most people would call mathematics. I'm going to say that we're going to develop a systematic reinforcement strategy, and that's going to be equal to conceptual understanding plus procedural fluency. You can't understand mathematics or become good at it if you don't. Well, let me stop there. We want to develop ways to systematically reinforce student understanding and their speed of fluent procedures. In other words, what sometimes teachers call math facts. Like, if you can't tell me that 7 times 8 is 56, if the only way you can figure that out is by counting 7 groups of 8, well, then you're going to become so influent that you're going to just stall out in all your activities. And so we have to develop a procedural fluency. We have to be able to say that 1/4 plus 1/4 is equal to 1/2 without doing a bunch of thinking procedures to go up to that. But here's the problem. You can't start off with procedural fluency. If you do, then it just becomes a memorization activity. You have to start with conceptual understanding. And then we'll develop some procedural fluency as we go. So what are the resources that we'll use to improve student learning? Well, we're going to have digital and classroom resources. That means things that you use on the internet and things that you use in your physical classroom, both. You're going to get some whole class instructional resources, things that you will use to teach the class in their first introduction and their refining of their understanding. You're going to get small group instructional resources, like what do I do with kids who need reinforcement, or maybe kids who didn't get it the first time, or maybe kids that need an extension activity. What will I do with those kids? You're going to get more than 10 complete classroom activities for stations or centers, depending what you call them. So we want students to be able to go into small group instruction where the teacher is not necessarily guiding the instruction, and they can practice. This would be called small group or individual practice, where they're starting to really hone their understanding. There's going to be digital activities that you could use for distance learning or in your classroom. Okay, so digital activities are going to be mediated by the internet. They're going to be online. They're going to be on the student's Chromebook or device, whichever device he or she is using. But they're going to be integrated. It's not going to be like now go do this activity to test to see if you understood it. It's going to be go do this activity to enrich what you understand or continue your learning. What are the purposes? I mean, our main, I guess I would call this our main goals. We want to keep students thinking. I mean, that's what we want them to do. We're really going to be teaching them to think. We're going to learn as educators to provide interleaved practice, that is, practice that happens over and over again and builds on itself to increase with increasing cognitive demand. That means it's going to start off simple but become more complex. We're going to build a place for math talk. Like, where does math talk happen? And talk doesn't have to be verbal, but it can be. Talk can also be written. Students will learn to talk fractions. And so the way that our brain develops understanding is through communication. And that's through discourse. And that's what we're going to do. Conceptual thinking, we want to develop that in our students, because you cannot become proficient at anything unless you understand it at some level. Now, sometimes a relatively shallow level is sufficient, but other times a deeper level is necessary. And that's how we're going to teach our students. There's depth to understanding, and there's always going to be more depth that we can learn. We're going to learn about how to build student understanding in fractions through activities. Like, we're not just going to explain everything to them, although we will explain a lot. We're going to have them and by the way, I think every teacher has had this experience. I know I have. When you say, oh, I've explained that to them, and then you realize they didn't understand what you thought they understood. So explanations, while important, are not sufficient. They need something else. What do they need? They need some activity that demands that they use the knowledge that you think you're trying to teach them. So we want to help students to think of themselves as fraction mathies. Like, I can start to understand this and then develop my thinking by doing these activities. Finally, procedural thinking. Like, how can we encourage our students to become proficient little fraction calculators? I think that most people are not. Most people would not call them proficient fraction calculators. They would say to themselves, I never really understood fractions, or fractions was the part of math that I got the least. I mean, I hear that a lot from adults, and also from students. So we're going to try to develop that fluency. Most students have experience with becoming fluent with their times tables, but very few have experience with becoming fluent with their, say, addition of fractions. We're going to learn how to develop quick fraction thinking based on understanding. Like, how can you go about thinking fluently using fractions? That's what our goal is. And we're going to provide a bunch of activities to try to help that develop. We're not just going to say, hey, do it faster. Teachers, you'll be working in small groups, probably your grade level group, or possibly above and below grade level, like a fourth and fifth grade team working together, or your fourth grade team. Whatever your group is, you're going to be working to get, oh, I'm sorry, I got a little ahead of myself here. On this slide, what I meant to say was we're going to have pre-made activities for our students. We're going to have small group activities, that is, things that they can work in stations or in centers. We're going to have online activities, but those will be aligned with the stations that we've already created for our in-class activities. You're going to get a classroom set of physical manipulatives, yay, and a free suite of digital resources, yay, even better, right? Okay, so back to the planning time and the collaboration time. So what will you do every day? Well, every day you're going to do some planning for the future. We're going to give you the tools to do that, but really, no matter how many times I create a tool or hand it to you, it doesn't become yours until you integrate it into your own planning. That's just necessary. I can't do that part for you. Nobody can. You have to do that. There's going to be obviously question and answer time, and I hope to create an environment where that question and answer can take place. There's going to be collaboration time. So you're going to be building with the team of educators that you came with, or a team of educators, either in the same grade or above and below grades. All right, that's it. That's the overview of what we'll be doing, and I look forward to seeing all of you. If you would like to email me and ask me questions in advance, I'll try to answer those quickly. If you'd rather text me, there's my phone number. Please do so. I respond every time I get a text. Thank you very much. Again, I can't wait for us to become fraction mathies together.